Hello everyone, my name is Keely Bien, and today I will be reading a book called A Hat for Mrs. Goldman, a story about knitting and love. And this book is by Michelle Edwards. This book is a great book to read at any ages. Preschool all the way to 3rd grade is recommended, but obviously it can be read to any age. I even found this book very interesting, and I think you guys will too. Before we begin, there are a few words that I want to address. The word knitting is brought up a lot. It's basically a craft, and you use yarn to intermingle amongst itself to create objects such as hats and scarves and blankets. It's a common craft that you guys should look into. It's really fun. Mitzvah is a Jewish word that is brought up amongst this book. Mrs. Goldman says it a lot. It's a Jewish word meaning a good deed. Then the word kepi, meaning head, little head, usually referring to a child's head. And abuela. Abuela is a Spanish word referring to grandmother. So I also want you guys to think of a few questions before we begin, like how is kepi and mitzvah used amongst this book? Have you guys ever knitted before? Maybe if you have, think about your experience when reading this book. And if you haven't, think about the experiences Sophia goes through when she learns to knit. What do you think this amazing hat that Sophia makes for her will look like? And have you guys ever experienced itchy hats before, itchy scarves? I don't know. These are some questions that you should maybe think about when you read this book. Silly questions, but think about it. So, this is A Hat for Mrs. Goldman by Michelle Edwards. When Sophia was a tiny baby, Mrs. Goldman next door knit her a tiny baby hat to keep her warm. Now, Sophia is big and she makes the pom-poms for Mrs. Goldman's hats. Hats for the tiniest babies. Hats for small, medium, and large friends and neighbors. Mrs. Goldman taught her how. Keeping kepis warm is our mitzvah, says Mrs. Goldman, kissing the top of Sophia's head. This is your kepi, and a mitzvah is a good deed. Now remember, kepi meaning head, mitzvah is a Jewish word meaning good deed. So I think it's really cool how Mrs. Goldman is teaching Sophia about that. Sophia and Mrs. Goldman bundle up to walk Mrs. Goldman's dog, Fifi. Winter is almost here. Fifi wears her dinosaur sweater. Sophia wears her fuzzy kitten hat and matching mittens. Mrs. Goldman made them all. An icy wind blows Mrs. Goldman's hair left and right. It turns her ears pink. Where's your hat? Asked Sophia. I gave it to Mrs. Chen, she explains. Mrs. Goldman's kepi must be cold, worries Sophia. At home, Sophia thinks and worries again. Worries and thinks. Mrs. Goldman needs a hat. Who will knit one for her? Not Mrs. Goldman. She's too busy knitting for everyone else. Last year, Mrs. Goldman taught Sophia how to knit. I only like making pom-poms, decided Sophia after a few days. Knitting is hard, and it takes too long. You can see how Sophia is struggling. Have you guys ever knitted before? I personally have not, but I know a few friends who have. It could be hard, but it's really fun. Now, Sophia digs out the knitting bag Mrs. Goldman gave her and the hat they started. The stitches are straight and even. The soft wool smells like Mrs. Goldman's kitchen soup. Sophia holds the needles and tries to remember what to do. She drops one stitch and drops another. Still, Sophia knits on. She wants to make Mrs. Goldman the most special hat in the world. This is Sophia working on the hat. This is her sniffing it, and this is her trying to make the hat. The next day, when Sophia and Mrs. Goldman walk Fifi, tiny fluffs of snow fall on Mrs. Goldman's head. Her ears are bright red. Mrs. Goldman's kepi must be very cold, frets Sophia. Sophia knits after breakfast. She knits after lunch. She knits after dinner. She even knits while Mama reads her bedtime story. But Sophia doesn't knit when she is at Mrs. Goldman's house. The hat is a surprise. All week, there's a frost on the windows. One day, when they are walking Fifi, Mrs. Goldman wraps Mr. Goldman's scarf around her head like she's a mummy. A fierce wind unwraps it and flings it up high to the air. Sophia jumps and grabs an end of the scarf. Fifi nips on the other end. Mrs. Goldman's kepi must be freezing, shivers Sophia. Sophia knits and knits and knits, faster and faster and faster, stitch by stitch, row by row. Then Sophia sews. This is her working on it. She seems to be putting a lot of effort into it. At last, Mrs. Goldman's hat is done. What do you think it looks like? I bet it's beautiful. Sort of. The hat is lumpy and bumpy. There are holes where there shouldn't be holes. It's not good. It looks like a monster, thinks Sophia. Sophia turns the hat over and around, inside and out. Mrs. Goldman's hat should not be a monster hat. That will scare Fifi. Sophia opens the box of hats Mrs. Goldman made her. Each one is special, but they are all too small for Sophia now, and way too small for Mrs. Goldman. Sophia looks in the hall closet. There are hats Mrs. Goldman made for Mama and Papa. She can't give her their hats. There's a scratchy old hat Sophia's abuela wore back in Mexico. But it's worse than Mrs. Goldman's scarf. Have your guys' abuela ever made you a scratchy hat or owned a scratchy, itchy hat? Remember, abuela means grandmother, so has your grandmother ever owned a scratchy hat? Sophia thinks about Mrs. Goldman and the hats they make together. Your pom-poms add beauty, Mrs. Goldman always tells her. And that's a mitzvah, too. Sophia feels her heart grow bigger and lighter like a balloon. What do you think she's gonna do? She searches her room for red yarn. Red is Mrs. Goldman's favorite color. She gathers her scissors, her sewing needle, and her stack of index cards. Sophia gets busy. Very busy. When Sophia is done, Mrs. Goldman's hat is the most special hat in the world. She added pom-poms to it. Sophia rushes next door. Surprise! That's fun. For me? Asked Mrs. Goldman. For you, answers Sophia. It's a hat, she says. Of course it is, explains Mrs. Goldman, and she hugs Sophia, and then she cries. What's wrong? Asks Sophia. Don't you like it? I more than like it. I love it, declares Mrs. Goldman. Gorgeous, like Mr. Goldman's rose bushes, and you know how I love his roses. Mrs. Goldman kisses Sophia on the top of her kepi. I made it all by myself, Sophia tells her. Amazing. And you will And will you look at all these pom-poms? 1, 2, 3, 4, counts Mrs. Goldman. Sophia joins in. There are 20 pom-poms, that's a lot, on Mrs. Goldman's hat, each one made with love. She gently puts her hat on. The next day, Sophia and Mrs. Goldman walk Fifi. Fifi wears her dinosaur sweater. Sophia wears her fuzzy kitten hat and matching mittens. Mrs. Goldman wears her Sophia hat. Her kepi is toasty warm, and that's a mitzvah. The end. Oh wait, I wanted to show you guys the ending picture. Here you guys go. Wait. There you guys go. That is A Hat for Mrs. Goldman, a beautiful book about friendship, love, and knitting. So yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed your time. I hope you guys really enjoyed the book, because I know I did. So, see ya!